Bien, máquinas, como ya han visto en esa especie de meme previo, bueno, ¿qué quería hacer con eso? Si bien en el canal habéis visto eh, algunos vídeos de lo que es Ignition Software, hoy traigo en consideración algo que, repito, no es nuevo, y reitero, no es nuevo, pero siempre salta a la palestra el hecho de que no conozcamos una tecnología o no tengamos conocimiento de ella no quiere decir que no exista. Las vinculaciones normalmente entre programas de managing de assets, como el caso de los MEC software, que básicamente son Manufacturing Execution System, y la adquisición de datos a través de plataformas como el caso de Ignition, que no solamente me permite esta especie de módulos utilitarios, comunicación a través de OPC-UA, un puente SQL, reportes, la gestión móvil, por ejemplo, la revisión de manera instantánea de los datos o una migración instantánea de los datos en tiempo real de lo que está ocurriendo con los assets o diferentes devices de la planta, notificaciones y alarmas, secuenciamientos y lo que es el web browser, que también tengo en el canal un apartado de ello. En alguna oportunidad me insistieron que, bueno, que era el web browser. Bueno, básicamente hay algunos equipos que me permiten, si están, por ejemplo, conectados, se me ocurre bajo comunicación tipo Ethernet IP, yo al accesar dentro de la red y poder visualizar una determinada dirección IP, yo puedo conocer en tiempo real toda una serie de datos. No voy a manejar marcas o brand aquí en particular porque de esto no va el tema. Pueden revisar en el canal y van a ver algunos casos donde uno mete la IP y puede obtener toda y cada una de la información necesaria que está aconteciendo sobre ese objeto o sobre ese device, sea un servocontrolador, sea un drive, lo que sea. ¿Vale? Entonces, Inicio me permite como una plataforma integral todos estos servicios, pero de forma adicional, podemos hacer un tratamiento y una función específica si es que requerimos hacer lo que es un software vinculado a MES y la toma de datos, o como es un CMMS, que es lo que llamamos el Gmao, ¿vale? Que me lo va a permitir de igual manera. Y aquí lo pueden ver, por ejemplo, me permite obtener el averaje de efectividad de cada objeto, gerenciamiento de recetas, hacer seguimientos. Y vean que aquí, por ejemplo, está un MES Enterprise. Hay empresas que se desarrollan, cuyo desarrollo está basado en la gestión del mes vinculado con Ignition. No viene tampoco al caso traer empresas que lo realizan, porque hay unos particulares y hay unos que son partners específicos de Ignition. Y en este caso, por ejemplo, podéis apreciar a la derecha una serie de elementos también vinculados a lo que es directamente la transmisión de datos, porque a fin de cuentas, por ejemplo, para obtener una métrica de OEE y los datos correspondientes, por ejemplo, nosotros simplemente necesitaríamos algunas señales que vayan al colector o al PLC o al data logger. Por ejemplo, si queremos colocar o visualizar señales de actividad, lo podemos hacer precisamente con la integración de web browser, o lo más fácil, una señal binaria, un bit, un true o un false, si la máquina está encendida o apagada. Claro, cabría después verificar si la imputación de esa parada es por mantenimiento o la parada es imputable a producción u operaciones. Pero bueno, ese es otro tratamiento. Con respecto, por ejemplo, a datos de cantidades o tiempos, podemos tener señales de conteo, señales analógicas de proceso o tipo frecuencia. Entonces, todo eso que recibimos de la maquinaria, de los distintos assets o devices de la planta, lo podemos llevar y migrar y transformar con los módulos y la arquitectura adecuada realizada a datos, a una data global, como ven aquí, ¿vale? Bueno, eso sin hablar de otras señales complementarias, como viene al caso, y bueno, todo es simplemente una integración completa que a fin de cuentas, desde lo que es toda la maquinaria, teniendo como eh, central los PLC o las placas electrónicas que rijan el proceso, tenemos el SCADA, el HMI y todo lo que ello conlleva hasta llegar a lo que sería el Business Intelligence, todo lo que es la gerencia del ciclo de vida del producto y el Enterprise Resource Planning, todo ello integrado en un solo software. Y bueno, como ven, eso me lo permite la plataforma de Ignition. Yo en lo particular estoy utilizando una versión trial, pero la gente de Ignition es tan bondadosa que nos permite a nosotros hacer las pruebas correspondientes y la adquisición de módulos. Bueno, ya en el canal han visto que la contraseña es, perdón, el usuario es admin, la contraseña es password, no hay secreto de ello. Y bueno, aquí tenemos buena parte de lo que es la configuración. Bueno, repito, la idea básica es que podamos entender lo que, o dimensionar lo que sería la vinculación, la unión de toda una plataforma completa e íntegra. Para ello voy a adicionar un video. Ese video está en versión angloparlante, está en versión inglés, pero les recomendaría que lo vieran paso a paso y puedan apreciar con detenimiento cómo serían los primeros pasos en lograr previamente esa especie de fusión de las bondades que ofrece Ignition, Perspective y lo que sería la adición de módulos correspondientes. Para ello hay una configuración previa, pero voy a dejar para ello, vayan los créditos nuevamente, recalco a Perspective, a la Inductive Automation, quien es la empresa desarrolladora del mismo, ¿vale? Entonces, a continuación les presento el video.
In this demo, I'm going to take you through the MES modules for Ignition. Ignition's a platform, just like your phone's a platform on which you can install apps. In Ignition, you can install modules. The platform is a unified platform, so all these modules work seamlessly together. There are two layers of modules in Ignition, the HMI SCADA layer and the MES layer. We're going to focus on the MES layer here today. But the HMI SCADA layer is our core layer. It provides functionality such as talking to devices, the historian, to create screens and launch clients, for reporting, mobility, alarm notification, and more. You can pretty much build any application you want with that core layer. On top of that core layer is our MES layer, and it provides modules for OE downtime to track efficiency and downtime of your production lines, SPC for taking samples and looking at samples in control charts, recipe changeover to load recipes down to PLC, track and trace to track the raw materials to finished goods. There's also a scheduling module which allows you to schedule production runs for OE, to schedule samples to be taken on lines, and also schedule track and trace when you're going to start and stop those runs. And there's also an MES Enterprise which allows you to do a cross-site analysis if you have multiple sites, multiple Ignition servers. Now this layer has all the functionality built in, much easier to configure, but it can also be customized. It sits on top of that core layer, so it can take advantage of that core layer. So for example, in SBC, if your sample falls out of control, you can alarm and notify people. In OE, if your downtime duration gets too long, if your OE falls below a certain percentage, you can notify people through the alarming system. You can use the reporting to create PDF reports that you can print and save as PDF. Of course, the vision module is where you're going to launch the screens and clients so you can see the dashboards and you can monitor what's happening there in the MES layer. So it's really important that it sits on top of that core layer, so we're not having to configure these different things separately. For Ignition, the MES layer is all built in with the HMI SCADA layer. So you can put everything into one project. One screen can contain OE downtime information, SBC information, HMI SCADA information, track and trace information. It's the beauty of Ignition is everything's designed to work seamlessly together. So we're going to focus on this MES layer here today and go through a demo project of the OE downtime module, the SBC module, the recipe module, and the track and trace module. Now I'm going to show you a demo from our online demo server that we have located at iademo.inductiveautomation.com. You can simply go to this URL, and the projects I'm going to show you here today are all available, and you can play around with these screens here. Now one thing that's really important about the MES layer is we provide you a set of screens that you can start from that we're going to look at here today, but you can customize those screens to meet your own requirements. So the first thing I want to do is actually go into the designer. Before we go into the screens, I want to show you the model that we're building off of for the MES layer. So here is the designer. When you're configuring the MES modules for Ignition, you're going to configure what we call a production model. So up here in the top left under the project browser under global, I'm going to see this area called production. And this is the model that all the MES modules follow. And it actually identifies the ISO 95 equipment hierarchy. So the first thing we're going to do is identify the enterprise. Inside that I have one or more sites. Inside the site I would have one or more areas. So here I've got like packaging or processing. In the area I would identify the production lines or the locations we're going to take samples or storage zones. So we can right click and we can add these items. So here I've got line 1 and line 2. In my production line, I can add my cells or machines. So I've got my filler, capper, labeler, inspection, case packer, and palletizer. So this particular line is modeling a bottling line that we have out there. And so we have many different things in this model, but we're essentially identifying all the equipment that we have. On that, we can then go over here on the right-hand side and configure all of the MES modules. You'll see a tab for each of the modules over here. So there's OE downtime, there's quality, recipe, track and trace, all that's right there. So we're going to start with OE downtime. So if I look here on my line, I can click on the OE tab and I can see that it's configured. I specified the in feed counter and the out feed counter so we know how much is coming in and what's going out of that line, so what we're producing. I also down here specified how I did waste, and there's many ways you can customize that. Manually entering in the waste, looking at in feed minus out feed, summing up the waste from all the machines, or maybe we have a sensor in place to count the actual waste on the line. Various ways we can look at that. So on the line here, I've identified the important things, the tags we need to calculate this information. I did the same thing for my machines. On the downtime area here, each of my machines I gave it a state, which is one if it's running, and anything other than that would be that it's in some downtime. And I specified all those different reasons here. And so we can, if that value goes to 3, I can see that's machine fault. We can specify all these with sub reasons in here. And of course all the settings for if we want it to be planned or unplanned, if you want operators to select it from the runtime. So the idea is that we can identify all of our lines, all of our machines, and we can configure the various tabs over here for the different modules that we have in Ignition. So if I go down to my site 2 and look at my packaging and look at recipe line Y, I configure this one for the recipe module, and I basically specified the set points, the tags that I want to write values down to, so for each of my machines and the line itself. For the track and trace up here under California, I have identified storage areas like my vinegar tanks and oil tanks. I've identified lines for where I'm going to unload product. So the idea is to identify the equipment hierarchy here for ISO 95, where we can do the configuration, some of the basic configuration for these that we're going to use in the modules. The idea is that by having this model, all the MES modules can work together. So when I'm looking at a particular production run for OE, I should be able to also look at what recipes were loaded down, what am I tracking for the track and trace, what samples have I entered in, all of that because it's all correlated back to that production line. So it's a really important model that all the MES modules will follow here. And we just identify some basic information, the model, and some of the tags that we can use for the collection of the data that's automatic behind the scenes. So as you can see, I've identified a couple of my production lines. And so for OE downtime in particular, I have line 1 and line 2. Now that I have the model in place, I can actually go to the runtime, to the screens, and that's where we're going to start and stop runs. We're going to monitor those runs. We're going to see the analysis. We're going to see all the dashboards and get a look at that data. So once we have that model in place, the rest of the information will be in the runtime here. So here's the runtime. This is the first project in the online demo server that is called IA demo. And it basically showcases all the modules. It's designed to be a walkthrough of all the features of Ignition. And so it starts with the HMI SCADA layer with the real-time status control, historical trending and alarming and security and localization and database manipulation, reporting, and more there. Then if you scroll down, you'll see the MES layer here that we're going to focus on today. So I've got a project for OE downtime, I've got a project for SBC, for recipe, and for track and trace. Now, in our demo server, we've separated all those into different projects. But in the real world, when you use a combination of those modules, you're going to combine them all into one project. You're going to be able to customize how you want those screens to look. One important thing for the MES modules for Ignition is that you're not stuck with the screens that were here. You're not stuck with some of that configuration. You have the ability to go in there and customize it. It's the product, Ignition, the platform is flexible enough for that to happen. So I'm going to first start with the OE downtime module here. And with that, I showed in the designer the configuration of that production model. I had a couple of production lines already configured, and where we specify the tags for the in feed and the out feed and how I'm going to collect the downtime. So that way, when we start a production run, Ignition knows exactly how to get the data from the PLC. So the first thing I want to show you here is I'm going to go to this product code screen. Once we've identified that model, we're going to go in here and identify product codes. So here I've got quite a few different product codes. I can add some new ones, but I have product code 1, and we're going to enable that product code for various lines. So here that product code is enabled for line 1. Down at the bottom, we can specify what that standard rate is for OE downtime. So that's the rate we're going to use for the performance part of OEE. We can also identify the package count, which is the ratio of the in-feed to the out-feed. And if we're going to use scheduling, we can identify a schedule rate, which is different than the standard rate, the theoretical rate that we can run on, so that we use that to estimate how long it would take to complete a production run when we schedule it out. So we're going to identify one or more product codes, and we do that in the runtime because we may add new product codes in the future, and we want to specify what those rates are going to be, because every product can have a different rate on different lines. So this is very important here. You have to have at least one product code for the line before we can actually start collecting the data. Once we have this, we can start a production run in Ignition. A production run basically just says, for this line, at this time, with this product, we're going to start collecting information that we have configured in that model. And there are many ways we can start a production run. We can do it simply manually, where somebody goes and presses a button. So if I go, oops, here, I have a screen where I basically can start and stop. I just have some buttons here. I can select my product code from a drop-down list. I can then start a new run, and at that point, Ignition is told to go and collect all the information from the PLC. So very simple. I can do a start-stop this way. We can also start a production run automatically. Maybe I have a trigger in the PLC that is going to start that run, or maybe on a certain time of day you're going to do that. The most common, most popular is through a schedule. So if I go here to a schedule screen that we have, I can see a schedule of all of my production lines that I have, and I can see which ones are running right now, which ones aren't. So here I've got quite a few lines. Line 1, line 2, and line B are running. Line A is not. On the right-hand side, I can see the schedule entries. The dark blue ones are the ones that are scheduled out that we haven't run yet. The green ones are the ones that are running right now, and the light blue are the ones that are in the past. So the idea is here that I can right-click and I can add a new entry for the schedule. And we can specify, let's say, a work order run or some other run. So we can deal with work orders. And so here I can select work order PC1A for product code 1. I can specify changeover duration like 5 minutes. And let's say I do 1,000 units. With that, we're going to estimate how long it will take to complete that run. So you can see the finish time here change. If I go to 2,000 units, it's going to increment some more. And that's based off that schedule rate that we put in there. We can also identify a workday routine, which has meals and breaks and various things that we're doing there. So now that I have that, I can save it. You can see that I've just now scheduled out a new entry on that line. Once we scheduled it, we can easily modify that. We can right click and edit. We can delete it. We can actually move it around to reschedule it onto different lines if that product code is enabled for that line. Very easy to work with the schedule here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that entry. So as you can see on line 1, I have a couple entries in line 1 and line B. I've got some entries that are scheduled out. Line 1 is currently running something right now. So the idea is that once we have things scheduled, we can then start and stop these runs. And we can do that automatically when it gets to the start of the run, or we can have somebody on the plant floor selecting the item from the schedule and pressing start and stop. And that's kind of what we modeled here in our demo project. So now that I've got these things scheduled, if I go down here to a screen that the operators would have on the plant floor, some day-to-day operation screens, this is where they can select a line and they can select the scheduled entry and they can start and stop based on that. So for example, if I go over here to line 1, line 1 is running something right now, but let's go ahead and end that one. I can go and select a new item from the schedule and let's go ahead and activate that run. It's going to go into the changeover time, and then when the operators are ready, we can actually press start. So what's important here is that we're actually tracking that changeover. If we go longer than 15 minutes, we're going to account that as downtime, and it's going to start eating into our availability if we want to or not. So I'm going to go ahead and start that run. Now it's everything is 100%. We're going to start seeing the data come through as far as what we're producing and the looking at the OE and the downtime that's coming in. So if I go back here to line 4, that already has some more data. I can see right now live how much we produced. I can see my OE broken up by quality, performance, and availability. Again, all live numbers. I'm monitoring this current production run right now. I can see all the downtime that's happened on that line here and get a good sense of really what's happened. The operators can provide more detail for us by providing notes. So I can put here notes for the run, and I can add that in. I can also provide notes on individual downtime entries. We have the ability to override reasons. So especially if you have like an e-stop button that was pressed, you may want to allow the operator to go in there and say, hey, well, it's really because we had this calibration problem or a belt broke or whatever it might be. So we can allow them to provide more detail there. And we will track both the automatic reason that detected from the PLC and the manual reason that they overrode to. We also have the ability to split downtime into two. So let's say this reject lane full was actually, some of it was a calibration problem and the other was the reject lane full. So I can actually split that and provide more detail there. So this screen is a great one to monitor what's happening right now, as well as to provide some more data. The line chart screen we have up here is also another screen that a lot of customers like to put on TV displays. So they can, right above the line, they can see what's happening as far as hourly actuals versus targets and hourly efficiencies, a forecast of what we should be producing, and what we're actually producing, and a parade of our downtime here. So these two screens are where we can monitor the current production run. We can create more screens like this. The ignition, with all the MES modules, we provide to you components you can bring onto screens. We provide to you tags you can drag on, and you can really mix and match and bring all these together into one screen if you wanted to. Now if I go back to the schedule is another place that we can actually monitor the current production run. So here if I look at line 1, in particular, or if I go down line 4, since this one's been running for a little longer, I can right click on that run and I can see what did we schedule versus what we're actually doing. And so that's what we scheduled, and here's what we're actually doing. I can see the note that I entered in just a couple minutes ago, and if I zoom in I can actually see the downtime entries and what those reasons actually were. So we get a good sense of what we should have been doing versus what we're actually doing there. I can also go back in time. We can go to previous production runs. I can look at what was scheduled versus actual was for those runs. I can actually look at what our OE and downtime was for those runs. I can look at what we produced as far as the production charts. I can get a lot of data on each of these. So every run that we start and stop, we collect all that data in the database, and the MES modules put all the data into a standard SQL database. That can be MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, doesn't matter. We're going to create all the tables, we're going to log all that data, we're going to manage all that for you, and we're going to query it for you on screens for how you want to display it. So everything I've shown you so far is we've been looking at one run for a line. So I look at the current run, or I went back in time here and looked at a past run to see the actual data there. But the beauty of the OE downtime is to figure out what are our biggest problems that we have out there across all of our lines, across all of our machines. I want to look at multiple lines and multiple production runs together. And so for that, we're going to go to a set of dashboard screens. that we have here. The dashboard screens will provide us a summary, as well as we can dive into some of the important information there. So the first 4 screens here are some summary screens that will allow us to look at the OE and downtime broken out by, by something where we can basically bring it up and get an aggregation of our OE or our downtime. So the enterprise summary is showing us the OE and the downtime and our production and waste counts for all of our production lines for every site, all rolled into one number, and I'm comparing that number by day. So I can see if I look at a bigger time range down here by selecting that range, I can see if my OE or my downtime is trending up or trending down. I get a good sense of that for everything that I have. And so I can see my OE by day, my downtime, my production, my waste count by day. We can then go down to a site level and compare it by site. So we can look at site 1 versus site 2 and see which one has, better OE or worse downtime or better production, whatever it might be. We can look at the areas, and we can look at packaging versus processing, again comparing the OE and the downtime there. Of course, we can go down to a line. So I can look at line 4 in particular. For the time period I've selected, I can see all of my runs for that time period rolled into one number for OE. I can see my production here. This isn't broken out by day, so I can see how we're producing. I can look at my downtime by machine here. So now it's the first time we can actually see some machines in here. And I can look at my top downtime reasons, so a little Pareto of that. So these 4 screens here are provided for operators or managers to look at the data, kind of summarize data so they get a good sense of what's going on. And they were created, all they can do is just simply change the start date, and on the line screen they can just select which line they want to look at. But ultimately, we can bring back data any way that we want. We can create any kind of summary screen that we want to look at. And this impromptu analysis screen really illustrates that. So first thing we can do is create a new report. So I'm going to call this my DT report. And I can bring back comment data, recipe data, quality data, downtime data, OEE and production data, whatever data I want to look at. So I'm going to say I want to bring back downtime data. And I can then select what data points I want to bring back. And we have a whole slew of them here that we can look at. These are all provided by Ignition. So I can bring back, for example, downtime minutes. And I can also bring back, let's say, number of occurrences. 2 really important things for downtime. So with the time period I've selected down here, I can see the 2 numbers, downtime minutes and occurrences for all of my production lines, everything rolled into those 2 numbers. I can then go up here and add a filter. So I can filter on a particular line or area or product code or shift or whatever I like to filter on. So say I go here and filter on line 1, I'll now see my numbers just for line 1. So I can remove the filter. I can also add a comparison. A comparison allows me to break up that data by some item. So I can break it up here by line, let's say, or I can where I can see the downtime now broken up by line. I can also go further and break it up then by shift. So I can see it by line, then by shift, how that data is actually broken out. So we have many options as far as what we want to look at, as far as data points, the comparisons, and the filters. We also have the ability to add our own items into this, our own data points into this, and we call those items additional factors. So this can be things like the operators running the line, the supervisor on shift, the cardboard vendor, the manufacturer raw material, the season of the year. Basically, any data you can get into a tag, we can log with our OE and downtime information. And we can come back and look at our downtime. We can compare it by the operator. We can compare it by that cardboard vendor. We can really see what's going on here. So it's a way for you to kind of extend the data that we have, add more context by adding more information that you can have out there along with what we're actually collecting in Ignition. So right now I'm looking at my downtime minutes and occurrences. I've compared it by line, so I can see it broken out here by line. I can view that data in a table. I can then export that data to CSV. I can also view that in a pie chart form as well as a bar chart form to show more than one data point. I can also look at a graph form. If I compare the data by a date, so here for example by day, I'll see it in a graph form, which is good to look at in some ways. So I'm going to go back here and look at the data by line and go back to my pie chart. Now these all support drilling down. So right now I can see that for my downtime minutes by line, line 1, line 4, they've got some downtime. Line B's got the most. So I can then click on the line. I can drill into something. Say I want to drill into the cell. I can look at the downtime now by machine. I can see the filler's got the most downtime here. Click on the filler. What's the reason detected from the PLC? So I can see scale faults happening most of the time. Well, I click on the scale fault. Well, what shift is it happening in most? Oh, it looks like it's pretty even here on the shifts. I can go back, well, who is the operator running the line? So that's an additional factor. I can look at that and see maybe it's a training problem. Maybe one operator needs to understand how to run that line more efficiently. So we can certainly go and look at the data any way we want by by drilling down here. And all it's going to do is change the comparisons and the filters over here on the left-hand side. So right now, for example, I'm looking at the downtime by the machine just for line 1. If I remove the line 1 filter, I can see my downtime now by all the machines we have and all of our lines. I can also then go here and look at the downtime by just simply the automatic reason. And maybe I want to filter out the top 5. So here's the top 5 reasons in that time period for all of my lines, all of my machines that we need to look into. So we can actually then further save this analysis. So we can have a whole bunch of these we can go back to. So I can go look at, for example, I have OEE here by operator, good in a pie chart or bar chart form. I have the OEE by day. I can look at it in a graph form. I have some other ones like a little downtime report here that I can look at. Just different ways we can bring back the different combinations of the data points, comparisons, and filters there. So a really powerful way of looking at any data you want to bring back here. We can use this idea to create other summary screens, because these summary screens were just basically they're little pie charts and bar charts that we specified the same data. What data points we want to bring back, how do we want to compare it, how do we want to filter it there. The same data that we bring back here can be viewed in table form, pie chart form, bar chart, or graph form. It can also be viewed in a PDF form. So I can actually go make a PDF report that I can print or save automatically or manually here. And so I've got a couple examples here. I've got a shift report for the line I've selected for the day. I can see each shift what those numbers look like. I can look at an OE report, so I can see the OE broken out by line, by day. I have a downtime report that shows me by line, by all the reasons, what that looks like. So there's a plethora of ways we can bring back that data that's been collected. So the important thing is here we identify that model. We can identify how we're going to collect that data from the PLC. We can start and stop runs, ignition. We can monitor those runs right there live, and then we can come back and do our analysis and look at any data that we want, and we can see that data in different forms, and we can even export that data out to do further analysis in another program. So that's basically what the OE downtime module has to offer. And if you were to go in the designer, there's many ways we can customize how we want these applications to look. We're going to move on now to the SPC module, which is the statistical process control module, and it's in charge of defining samples and taking samples and looking at those samples in control charts, also to see if they deviate from normal conditions, if they go out of control. So it all starts with a definition management screen where we first define the samples that we want to take. And so here on the left-hand side, I can add a new definition and specify how many measurements I want to take. So for example, I've got one here called assembly. We then can specify all the attributes that we want to enter the data in for. So all the things we're going to collect. So I have how many missing holes, how many burrs, how many bend fractures, and missing welds, and all of that. We can, for each of these attributes, we can identify if it's required or not, what the data type is, what the default value, what the min and max values are for validation purposes. But these are all the data points we're going to enter in for that sample. Then we identify where we're going to take that sample. And that can be taken, for example, at the lab or on the line or somewhere in our facility. And it's really there for filtering purposes. So that if the lab is there and they're responsible for various samples, that we make sure that they take those samples when we're supposed to. Because when we specify the location, we can actually schedule a sample to be taken automatically behind the scenes, or we can have it scheduled where there's an entry. They can see in the lab, for example, here's the samples that are coming due, here's the ones that are due right now, here's the ones that are overdue. And I'll give you a sense of that as we go forward here. The bottom, we can then identify all the control limits we want to associate with that sample definition. So these are for all the control charts we plan on using. They're just enabling them. So you can actually enable all of them if you want to. But there are things like the upper control limits and lower control limits for various control charts there. And lastly, we identify the signals, which are the signals that will let ignition know if they go out of control. And we have all the Nelson rules and Westinghouse rules in ignition. You can also define your own custom rules there. So for example, I have Nelson Rule 3 here checked that basically will notify people if you have 6 consecutive points in increasing or decreasing order from those samples that are being entered in. So we'll get a sense in a bit here about how we can monitor that and we can see those alarms that are being sent out. So the first thing though is to define all the samples we're going to take. Once we do that, we can take the sample automatically or we can take it manually. And there are a couple ways you can take it manually. This is a very generic screen here where we can select the location. So I can select the processing line. I can then select that assembly definition. I can add a new sample in. Ignition will create that form for us automatically. We can then go in and provide the data. Ignition will do the validation for us, all of that when I press save. So this allows me to look at any sample definition I put in there. So if I go line 1 quality, I've got some other ones here. The form will change for us as we're using different ones here. Another way that's not as generic is to have a screen specifically for one definition. So here's a screen for the assembly definition where I can enter in a new sample, and same form we had in the previous screen here, but it's just for that one assembly. I also have the work instructions over here so I can see what I need to do. And at the bottom I can associate a part number. You can actually associate any data you want along with the sample that you're entering in the system. And we can use that for filtering and use that for reporting purposes. So I can then go ahead and save that sample. Again, Ignition does the validation, all that for you, and builds that form for you. Another way we can do it is, besides the automatic collection behind the scenes, we may have special lab equipment that we have on the client station, maybe a spectrometer or something that spits out files, or is RS-232 that we need to connect to and read that data in. So we have an instrument interface module which allows us to look at serial devices, or also look at directories to see if a file gets put in there, so we can parse that file in and we can bring that as a sample. So here's a screen where if I create this file, it's going to put one in there. Again, it's monitoring that directory, and we're going to get that value. We're going to bring it in, parse it, and show it into our form here. So I can then associate my part number with it, and I can enter that sample in. We can also have it be automatic if we want to there. But it's a way of getting samples from the lab equipment that we have out there. Many, many ways that we can enter in samples. We even provide scripting functions where you can do it yourself in any facility in Ignition. Once we have that, we can certainly look at the samples that are being scheduled. So here's a screen for a particular location where I can see all the samples that are coming due, overdue, or waiting for approval. As you can see, I've got some that are in the overdue state. I've got one that's in the waiting for approval state. And there are alarms down here that fire off that we can notify people when these samples go into these different events. So if I schedule a new one for right now, I can see that now we have one that's coming due. Alarm just got tripped off that we again can notify. So as I go in here and I edit these samples, I put some values in. We're going to start, clearing some of these different states. So if I go up here and put the last one in, now I have no samples that are coming due, or overdue, but I do have some that are waiting for approval. You have the ability to actually do an automatic approval or a manual approval on your samples. So I've elected a manual approval. I'm going to go ahead and select all these, and I'm going to go and approve them. Now they're all approved. All my alarms are cleared. And so it's a great way to kind of monitor and have accountability for taking these samples in the system. We do the same thing for rule monitoring. So if we're looking at the samples that are coming in and we're checking them against those rules to see if they ever go out of control, we can be notified when that condition happens as well. So if I create some good data, this is going to be individual chart. My data is between my limits. There's no other violations. Everything's happy here. There's no alarm. If I create some bad data, which this space is going to create 6 consecutive points in increasing order, that's a Nelson Rule 3 violation, I'm going to get an alarm that gets tripped out where I can notify people, and on the control chart I'll see an indication. So here I'm going to see a red circle. You can customize what that's going to look like. And I can then further, on the operator, can actually go and edit the note, assign a cause as to why that happened. So here, for example, like a measurement error, and put a note in there that this was a problem. I can save that. Now I'll see on the chart itself there's a little note that's there. So it's a great way of, when we go back in time, we can see if there's any out of control signals that happened. So this is an individual control chart. We're looking at one control chart on this screen. Of course, we have many other control charts that we can look at. We can embed any of them onto any screen. But we also have this screen here that allows us to look at all the control charts, sort of that impromptu analysis idea, where I can go up here and select from one of my definitions. So let's say I go to my checkware. I can see an individual chart here. Go to the individual one. Individual, my data follows with the samples. My table follows with the chart down below. We can then go in here. We can actually edit the control limits. So let's say my control limits in this case is going to be 122.5. Let's get that a little bit closer to what it should be. I can change my control limits. I can right-click on these. I can add the notes on the points there. We can change our start date and end date for the data we want to look at. We can add filters over here for how we want to filter out data, what attributes we want to look at, if we want to look at signals, and of course those control limits. Now this check where I can look at in an individual, I can also go look at that in a histogram or even a process performance chart, and just different control charts that we have in Ignition. I can also look at my assembly, which I have different ones of these saved. My assembly I want to look at in the Pareto. Again, we can save these and come back to them later on. We can create new ones of these. So we can take any control chart, we can embed it into other windows and look at that. We can also, of course, take that data and we can put it into a PDF report that we can print or save automatically or manually there. So that's what the SPC module is really all about. It's about defining the samples, taking the samples, looking at them in control charts, monitoring if they go out of control, and to be also to monitor the schedule to make sure that people are actually taking those samples at the right times. The next module we're going to look at is the recipe module, and this one allows you to load recipes down to the PLC. And so it's a very simple one-time load of the recipe. It's not a batching system at all. It's designed to work with the OE downtime and track and trace modules so that, hey, we start a production run for OE, we can load a recipe down on a changeover based on the product that we selected. But it can also stand alone. It could just be a simple recipe system. And we give you the ability to add, edit, and delete recipes. We can load recipes down to the PLC. We do handshaking to verify they got loaded down successfully, and we can alarm if it didn't get loaded successfully, and we have some reports that are in there. And of course there's some security that we can identify here as well. So the first starts with a recipe editor. This is where we can actually define all the recipes that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new recipe. I'm going to call this recipe D. And once I do that, I can then right-click and select which production items I want to associate with that recipe, so which lines and machines in my production model in the designer that I configured that I want to use. So once I do that, then it will give me all the set points. So I can see there's my line speed and my capper and my force and my line speed there, and I can actually then go in and start changing these values. So say it was 120, I actually want it to be 130, and I can go identify all the set points there. Now there is, of course, the security. We can control who is allowed to edit these recipes based on the roles, so role-based security and ignition. We can also control what range they're allowed to change a value in. So if they can go between 100 and say 150, whereas maybe somebody else with a different role can change it, which is a much bigger range there. So you have that ability to really control who can make these changes and to what extent can they make those changes. So we can identify the recipes. We also have the ability to do sub-recipes or descendants. So here I've got my master C. It's got its settings for all those set points. And then if I look at my descendants, I've got recipe C1 down to C5. And they're just variations of that master. So it's like if you have a vanilla recipe, you can have variations of that vanilla that we can then load and work with. So what's important here when you do descendants is that if I look at the recipe line Y, line speed's 90. And if I go down here, line speed on the recipe line Y is 125. So I've assigned it for that C1. If I go here, I can right click and I can revert the value back to the master. So if I go make a change to the master, of course that will funnel right down to any of the descendants. So it inherits all the set points from the parent unless we go in and explicitly change that value to say 100, where I define that in that particular recipe. So once we've identified all the recipes, we can then load it down to the PLC. And there's many different ways we can do that as well. It can be done automatically behind the scenes. It can be done manually. There's different ways you can do it manually there. It can be a hybrid of the two. So this screen here allows us to see all the recipes for line Y. I can right click and I can select that recipe, in which case it's going to load it down to all the PLCs. You can see they're all values good, everything's happy. If there was a problem, of course, we can alarm and notify somebody that it didn't get loaded down correctly. Furthermore, once the recipe is loaded to the PLC, we listen on those tags in the PLC to see if they change. So here, for example, on my sealer, my value is 81 right now. If I change that to 95, then you're going to see that a variance exists. We track that a variance exists because that set point could change in a panel view or in programming software outside of Ignition. And if it does, and it differs from what we loaded down, we want to know about that. We want to report so we can see that these variances have happened. So this is one way that we can load recipes. Another way would be having drop-down lists. So I can select the recipe line Y, I can select recipe C4 here. I can set that one, have a confirmation. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I can then load that down to all of my my machines and my lines there. That's basically what the recipe module has to offer. We have a couple other reports. So we have a comparison report where I can actually take two recipes, like recipe C1, recipe C2, where I can see all the unequal values or equal values, so I can see how they differ or how they're the same. The changelog report allows me to see all the changes that have happened to recipes. So if I go look at recipe C5, I just entered in there. Recipe D, I just entered in. I'll see the changes I made to that. I also made a change to recipe C1. I changed some values there. So we can see who did it and what they changed exactly. A variance log as well, we can see all the variances that have happened. So I can look at recipe line Y and look at recipe C1 in particular and see that we changed the sealer from 81 to 95. So we get a sense of all that happened. That's really what the recipe module has to offer. And it's a very simple recipe system, can be combined with OE downtime or track and trace. We even have customers combine recipe with our SFC module, the sequential function chart module, so they can do a batching system where we can continually load down different recipes based on conditions that we have there. The last module we're going to look at here today is the track and trace module, and this allows us to track our raw materials to our finished goods. It's the genealogy, it's a lot tracking, so we can see if we had a recall, we can see where that came from, and we can look at a raw material, see where it went, all that good stuff. And this module follows the IS 95 standard, so we can identify everything there, except for we don't do certification for personnel. But here, this MES Manager screen is the first screen we're going to go to, where we can identify the equipment, the material that we're using, the personnel that are going to be doing the operations, and what those operations actually are. On the equipment area, we've already identified all the equipment. We did that in the designer. So with that IS 95 equipment hierarchy in that production model, we've identified our vinegar tanks and oil tanks and unload stations and various things like that. We also have the ability to go in here and add equipment classes, which can be categories of our equipment. So in the production model, we have the area that these equipment can be inside of, but maybe you have a separate category you want to use. And IS 95 is all about equipment classes and the actual definitions, so we can generate any classes that we want. So here I've got quite a few. I've got my unload station 1 and 2. And of course, we can right-click and we can add new items to that class. I have vinegar tanks and oil tanks, and basically I'm modeling I'm making dressing here. So I'm going to receive our raw material, the vinegar and the oil and the dry goods. I'm going to mix that. I'm then going to bottle that as my finished goods. So I have finished goods storage, where things are going to be stored, where we're going to be running products, all that I've identified as my equipment here. Then we have our material, which are all the things we're going to be tracking through our process. So in my case, I've got bottles and dressings and vinegar and seasonings and oil. And again, all of these I just created myself. So here in my vinegar, I've got 2 grades, grade A and grade B, in which case I've got all my definitions. Again, very easy to go and add new children to this. We then identify the personnel, the people that are doing the operations. So here I've got, for example, mixing operators and packing operators. And these users come from Ignition's security system, which can be Active Directory or managed in Ignition or even externally in a database. And this will allow us to, it'll serve 2 purposes. We can track who's doing what operations, and we can possibly prevent them from doing the operation if they're not part of that particular class. So if they're not a packing operator, they can't start the packing operation. So I've got mixing operators, I got packing operators, again, just different people that are inside these different roles, if you will. Once we identify the equipment, the material, and the personnel, we can then identify all the things we're doing, all the segments, all the individual processing segments. So in my case, I'm going to unload oil and vinegar, I'm going to receive bottles and seasonings, I'm going to mix dressing and then bottle it. So I'm going to look at, if I look at my unload vinegar, if I right click on this and edit, there's a lot more details here. This specifies all the inputs and the outputs, where it's happening, who's doing it. So we're essentially adding custom properties, material as inputs or outputs, equipment, and personnel that we're going to associate with that segment. So here I am unloading vinegar, so my vinegar is going to go into a vinegar tank. So I've classified material here, vinegar, that is an output. That output is of gallons. It's going to go into my vinegar tanks here. And I'm going to manually assign the lot number, and I'm going to manually assign the quantity. So in our demo here, we're going to manually put data in. But of course, we can get the lot number, we can barcode scan that, we can type it in manually, get from the PLC. The quantity could also be from the PLC looking at flow meters, or it could be manually entered in there. There's different ways we can get these values into the track and trace module. So I get my vinegar, it's going to happen at the unload station, and the unload operator is going to be the one to do it. So we're essentially going to identify this flow, because here it goes into vinegar tanks, and then when I go and mix dressing, if I look at the details of this, I have 3 inputs, oil, seasonings, and vinegar, and I have 1 output is dressing, and if I look at my vinegar as an input, it's going to get it from the vinegar tanks, and the dressing is going to go into the holding tanks. So again, we're identifying that actual flow there. And all the details for how we're going to collect the data from one process segment to another. Once we have the segment in place, we can then start collecting data against those. And there's many ways we might be doing this here in Ignition. You might have a dedicated project that's going to be for a particular client console on the plant floor for unloading your vinegar or your unload operation. You might have a dedicated one for the mixing or the bottling area. And how that screen looks, you may combine that with HMI SCADA. You might have a screen where they're going to be entering barcodes. I mean, all that's going to be very flexible and very variable here. What I've done is I created a tab over here for every one of my segments, all in the same project, so that I can go through each one of these, enter in the data, so I can ultimately see a report. I'm going to start with my vinegar unload, so I can actually unload balsamic vinegar, and let's say Rodney's the one to do that, and it's going to go into vinegar tank 1, and let's say my lot number here is going to be today lot of bin 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to bring in 5,000 gallons of that. So again, I'm entering these data manually, but we can certainly get it from barcode scanning, PLCs, all that good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and then start the operation, and so that's really important for the track and traces to signify a start. And that just shows at this time we're going to start the operation. It's an active lot, so if I look at my inventory, I can see that I have that today lot VIN 1, 2, 3, 4 that's going into that particular storage location. So we have inventory that we're looking at here. It's part of WIP, work in process. We can see exactly what's in each of these locations. And it also allows you to potentially interlock with PLC. Maybe you don't want to start it unless the PLC is ready, and when you start it, it actually sends something down to the PLC. Maybe it loads a recipe down the PLC. Maybe it starts a production run for OE downtime. There's many things that can happen at the same time with that start. And the same thing with the stop here. So I press stop. Now my operation is complete. I have a completed lot that's sitting in that tank that I can use in another operation. I can do the same thing for oil and the dry goods, and then I can actually go and mix it. So here I've already got a mixing operation started. Let me go in that one, start another one. So I can bring in oil, any oil that I have in the system. Let's say I bring in 100 units, and we're going to do validation on the quantity coming in. So we make sure we have enough of it, and it's making sure you can only bring in the right lot numbers into this based on what we defined. So I can bring my seasonings here. Say I bring in 20 pounds of that. I'm going to bring in my vinegar, and so I should see my today lot VIN 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say I bring in 100 gallons of that. At the end, I'm going to make balsamic dressing. It's going to go in the holding tank 2, and we're going to say 200 gallons of that. Go ahead and begin it and end it. The last one for me is my bottling line. I'm going to go ahead and bottle dressing. Joan and Sam are doing it. I'm going to bring in some bottles. Let's say I bring in, 16 of those. My dressing, I'm going to bring in the last one I put in holding tank 2. That's auto-generated there for me. I'm going to bring in all of that into this operation, and I'm going to store the final product into finished good bay 2. Go ahead and begin it, and then end that operation. So we can collect all the data along the way, and ultimately what we want to do is create a report so we can see where product where it's come from to where it's going. And every MES package out there, you can bring back data in a table format or a PDF format. We can do that as well. We went one step further, and we created this thing called the trace graph, which allows us to visually see how the data is being tracked. So we can see those lot numbers as it's moving through. And so the screen works where I can select over here, I can filter for various lots. I can look at, here I'm looking at completed lots in this time period. My drop-down list will show me all of those. So it can be raw materials or it can be finished goods. So here's my finished good lot 28. If I click on that, I can see on the right-hand side the visual trace of the raw materials to my finished goods. So I can see on the left-hand side goes raw materials. I can read that over to the right-hand side to the finished goods. I can see exactly what's gone into this. So if we look at this a little closer, that's lot 28 that I just did. I brought in vinegar. I unload vinegar in unload station 1 into my vinegar tank 1. It was today lot VIN 1, 2, 3, 4. I can right-click on this, show details See all the details there as far as what material, where it went, how much, who did it, what times. We see that we did the same thing for seasonings and for oil. We brought that into a mix operation. I can right-click on that, show details. You can see all the inputs and outputs of that operation. Ultimately getting into the holding tank, which goes into our bottling line, which we also brought in bottles, and then that was to a finished good. That's sitting in Bay 2. So we can see the full traceability of that particular lot number. What's cool about this is not only can you see this, the whole trace, you can see the finished good, we can also go back to the raw materials, but we can then go further. So if you look at my RM Bay 1, this Italian 1234, I can see that there's number 8 down here in the bottom right. That means that that lot number of Italian seasoning has been used in 7 other mix operations, not just this one. So if I click on that, I can then see all the other mix operations that it went into, ultimately going into multiple finished goods that are out there. So we get this little breadcrumb style down here, so we can go back and forth and we can look at these different things. We can zoom in and out of this trace. So it allows us to kind of jump around, easily get the data we want. We can certainly view that in table form and PDF form as well. But another thing that it allows us to do is actually drill into more data. So for example, on my tanks, I can be logging the temperature with my tanks. In the historian, I can have alarms that are being logged. I can be doing OE downtime. I can be loading recipes down. I can be taking samples. All the stuff that we've shown here today, with this, we can bring it all back in one view. When you look at MES, you do think track and trace. That's what we're producing. All the other data there is information we want to look at when we're looking at this report at the end of the day. And with Ignition, because it's a single unified platform, everything works together, we can actually achieve that. That was our big goal, to make it a unified MES solution without having to go to different applications. So here in my trace graph, I can right-click on my oil tank and I can see what is the temperature trend as we move that product through that particular tank. I go to my bottling line. What is my OE and downtime? I can add these menus here so I can look at more data. What is the OE and downtime when we move that product through that particular line? If we connect to third-party systems like ERP systems or shipping systems or whatever through databases or web services, we could also send and receive data from that. So we can even tap into, in this case, our shipping info, so where it's going to actually be shipped, to which customers it's going to go to for that particular lot number. So it's a way for you to actually extend it, to add more data we can bring into to this trace graph from what we've actually produced. So this track and trace is really the tracking of a lot of the raw materials to finished goods, gives you that complete traceability, that genealogy of product, and with Ignition, with all these modules, they're all meant to work together, even on the HMI SCADA front, all the way up to the MES layer. So today we showed you all the MES modules and sort of how they work and how we can even customize them to fit your needs. These modules are very flexible and are designed to be a unified system. Thank you.